The Arizona sun burned merciless and white across the Sonoran desert, turning the air itself into something that shimmered like water, but offered no relief. Dust devils danced between the saguaro cacti, and the only sounds were the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk and the steady clip-clop of hooves on sun-baked earth. Ethan McKrae rode his paint horse through this furnace of a landscape, his hat pulled low and his shirt already soaked with sweat despite the early hour. He was 3 days out from Tucson, carrying a message to the mining camp at Copper Ridge about delayed supply shipments. It was honest work, the kind that kept a man fed without requiring him to compromise his principles. Ethan had learned the value of honest work the hard way, after years of riding with questionable men for questionable pay. Now, at 32, he preferred the solitude of the desert to the complications of civilization. The sound reached him before he crested the rocky outcrop, voices raised in anger, the kind of harsh shouting that meant trouble was brewing. Ethan reined in his horse and dismounted, creeping forward to peer over the ridge. What he saw in the valley below made his blood run cold. A group of white men had surrounded an elderly Apache, forcing him to his knees in the sand. There were 6 of them, rough-looking types with the sunburned faces and worn clothes of prospectors or drifters. Their leader, a barrel-chested man with a matted beard, stood over the Apache with a coiled whip in his hands. "Where is it, you red devil?" the man snarled. "We know you've got gold hidden somewhere in these hills. Your kind always knows where the treasure is." The Apache was ancient, probably 70 years old, with long white hair and a face carved by decades of wind and sun. Despite his predicament, he sat with perfect dignity, his back straight and his dark eyes unafraid. Around his neck hung a collection of medicine pouches and sacred objects that marked him as a holy man, a keeper of his people's spiritual traditions. "I have told you," the old man said in accented but clear English. "I know nothing of gold. I am a medicine man, not a miner." The leader spat in the dust. "Don't lie to us, old man. Everyone knows you savages have been pulling gold out of these mountains for centuries. You're going to tell us where it is, or we're going to make you wish you had." The whip uncoiled with a crack that echoed off the canyon walls. Ethan saw the Apache's jaw tighten, but the old man didn't flinch. He had probably faced worse things than these desert rats in his long life. Ethan should have ridden away. This wasn't his fight, and getting involved would only bring trouble. But as he watched the coiled whip in the leader's hands, something inside him rebelled. He had seen too much cruelty in his life, had participated in too much of it himself in his younger days. He couldn't just sit there and watch an old man be tortured for information he probably didn't have. Moving carefully, Ethan led his horse down the backside of the ridge and approached the confrontation from an angle that would give him the advantage of surprise. His hand rested on the grip of his Colt .45, though he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. Sometimes the mere presence of an armed man was enough to diffuse a bad situation. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Ethan called out as he emerged from behind a boulder, his voice calm but carrying clearly across the desert air. Mighty hot day to be having a discussion. The 6 men spun toward him, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. But Ethan kept his own gun holstered, his posture relaxed despite the tension crackling through the air, like lightning before a storm. "This ain't your concern, stranger," the leader growled. "Keep riding." Ethan touched the brim of his hat politely. "Well, now I would, except I'm curious about what brings 6 grown men to surround one elderly fellow out here in the middle of nowhere. Doesn't seem like very sporting odds." "We're questioning a suspect," another man said, a thin fellow with nervous eyes. "This Indian knows the location of stolen gold, and we aim to get it out of him." Ethan looked at the Apache, taking in the man's ceremonial clothing and the sacred objects around his neck. "Stolen gold, you say? That's a serious accusation. You boys got any proof of that?" The leader's face reddened. "We don't need proof. Everyone knows these savages." "Careful," Ethan interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge. "That old man looks like a medicine man to me. Holy man, in other words. Now, I may not know much about Apache customs, but I know enough to understand that harming a holy man is considered a serious offense. The kind of offense that tribes tend to take very personally. The nervous man shifted uncomfortably. Look, mister, we ain't looking for trouble with you. Just ride on and forget you saw anything. Ethan shook his head slowly. Can't do that. See, I've got what you might call a personal policy about standing by while old men get beaten. It doesn't sit well with my digestion. The leader took a step forward, the whip still coiled in his hands. You best think real careful about what you're doing here, stranger. There's 6 of us and 1 of you. True enough, Ethan agreed. But I'm the one with his gun hand free, and you boys are all bunched up nice and tight. I reckon I could drop 3 of you before you cleared leather, and the odds would be a lot more even after that. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Ethan could see the men weighing their options, calculating risks and rewards. They wanted whatever they thought the Apache could tell them, but they weren't looking to die for it. Finally, the leader spat again and let the whip fall to his side. This ain't over, old man, he said to the Apache. We'll be watching you, and when you're alone again, we'll be back. Looking forward to it, Ethan said cheerfully. I'll make sure to let folks in Tucson know you boys are operating in this area. Sheriff Martinez always likes to stay informed about suspicious activity. The mention of the law made the men exchange uneasy glances. Whatever they were really up to, it probably wouldn't bear official scrutiny. They mounted their horses with obvious reluctance and rode away, but not before the leader fixed Ethan with a stare full of promise. When the dust had settled, Ethan dismounted and walked over to the Apache, who was slowly getting to his feet. The old man moved with the careful dignity of age, brushing sand from his clothes and checking his medicine bundles to ensure they hadn't been damaged. You hurt anywhere? Ethan asked. The Apache studied him with intelligent dark eyes. I am unharmed, thanks to your intervention. I am called Nantan Lupin. It means Chief Grey Wolf in your language. I'm the medicine man for the Chiricahua band that camps in the mountains to the east. Ethan touched his hat brim respectfully. Ethan McKrae. I'm just a rider passing through. You are more than that, Nantan Lupin said quietly. You risked your life for a stranger, and an Apache stranger at that. Such courage is rare among your people. Ethan felt uncomfortable with the praise. Those boys were just bullies. Bullies usually back down when someone stands up to them. Perhaps, but you did not know that when you chose to act. The medicine man gathered his scattered belongings, including a leather pouch that had spilled herbs across the sand. You have done my people a great service today. Such kindness creates debts that must be repaid. No debt, Ethan said firmly. Any decent man would have done the same. Nantan Lupin smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. You would be surprised how few decent men there are when the moment comes for action. But I will not argue with you about debts and honor. Instead, I will ask you a question. Do you know why those men believed I had knowledge of gold? Ethan shrugged. Greed makes people believe a lot of foolish things. True, but in this case their belief has some foundation. The medicine man gestured toward the surrounding mountains. These hills do contain gold, Mr. McKrae, much gold. My people have known of it for generations, but we do not seek it. Gold brings only trouble. It makes men mad, turns friends into enemies, brings soldiers and miners to destroy the land. Ethan nodded. He had seen firsthand what gold fever could do to men, how it could transform ordinary people into monsters willing to kill for the chance at wealth. But knowledge of the gold's location is part of my sacred duties, Nantan Lupin continued. It is a secret passed down from medicine man to medicine man, held in trust for the day when my people might need it for survival. Those men somehow learned that I possess this knowledge, and they figured they could beat it out of you. Yes, but they do not understand that such secrets cannot be taken by force. They can only be given freely, as a gift or an act of trust. The old man studied Ethan carefully. You have proven yourself worthy of trust, Ethan McKrae. Would you be willing to help an old man complete his journey home? Ethan considered the request. Helping an Apache medicine man travel through territory crawling with hostile whites would be dangerous. But leaving the old man to travel alone would be worse. Those 6 prospectors would almost certainly try again, and next time Ethan might not be around to intervene. "How far?" he asked. "Half a day's ride into the Dragoon Mountains. There is a hidden canyon where my people make their summer camp." Nantan Lupan's eyes twinkled. "Of course, if you were to accompany me, you would be the first white man ever to see this place. My people might not understand your presence." Ethan grinned. "Well, I reckon that's a risk I'll have to take. Can't have you getting waylaid by those buzzards again." They rode together through the heat of the afternoon, following deer trails and hidden paths that seemed to exist only in the medicine man's memory. Nantan Lupan proved to be an excellent traveling companion, sharing stories of his people's history and explaining the spiritual significance of various landmarks they passed. "You see that peak?" he said, pointing to a distinctive spire of red rock. "That is where the first Apache received the gift of fire from the spirits. And that valley below us is where my grandfather had his vision quest, the journey that made him a medicine man." Ethan found himself fascinated by the Apache's deep connection to the land. Where he saw only rocks and scrub brush, Nantan Lupan saw sacred places, each with its own story and meaning. It was like traveling with a living library of ancient wisdom. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, they approached a narrow canyon barely wide enough for 2 horses to travel abreast. The entrance was hidden behind a screen of boulders and thorny ocotillo plants, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "This is the entrance to our summer camp," Nantan Lupan explained. "Are you prepared to meet my people?" Ethan checked his weapons and straightened in his saddle, "As ready as I'll ever be." They rode through the narrow passage, the canyon walls rising on either side like the ribs of some enormous beast. The path twisted and turned, following the course of an ancient stream, until suddenly it opened into a hidden valley that took Ethan's breath away. The Apache camp sprawled across a meadow beside a clear stream, dozens of wickiups and ramadas scattered among ancient oak trees. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children played in the grass, and horses grazed in a natural corral formed by fallen logs. It was a scene of peaceful domesticity that completely contradicted every story Ethan had ever heard about savage Indians. But as they emerged from the canyon, that peace shattered like glass. Warriors appeared as if from nowhere, surrounding them with drawn weapons. Ethan found himself staring down the barrels of at least 20 rifles, while other men held arrows nocked and ready to fly. "Hold!" Nantan Lupan called out in Apache, then switched to English for Ethan's benefit. "This white man is under my protection. He saved my life today and escorted me safely home." A tall, powerful-looking warrior stepped forward, his face painted with the symbols of war. He spoke rapidly in Apache, his tone clearly hostile. Nantan Lupan replied calmly, and soon other voices joined the conversation. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but he could read the body language well enough. Some of the warriors wanted him gone, others wanted him dead, and a few seemed willing to trust their medicine man's judgment. Finally, the debate subsided, and Nantan Lupan turned to Ethan. "They have agreed to hear your story before deciding your fate. Dismount slowly and keep your hands visible." Ethan climbed down from his horse, acutely aware of all the weapons trained on him. The tall warrior approached, studying him with eyes like black stones. "I am Cochise," the warrior said in heavily accented English. "Chief of this band. Nantan Lupan says you saved his life. Why would a white man help an Apache?" Ethan met the chief's stare steadily. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because 6 men against 1 old man isn't fair odds, no matter what color anyone's skin might be." Cochise's expression didn't change. Many white men would have helped those 6 instead of interfering. Many would have demanded a share of any gold they found. "I'm not most white men," Ethan said simply. "So it seems." Cochise walked around Ethan in a slow circle, like a predator sizing up potential prey. "Nantan Lupan tells me you knew he was a holy man. that you understood the significance of harming him. How does a white cowboy know such things? Ethan thought carefully before answering. I've spent time around different tribes, Navajo mostly, but some Pueblo and Mexican Indians too. I learned that medicine men are like priests or ministers to white folks. They're not warriors, they're healers and keepers of wisdom. Hurting them is like burning down a church. Something shifted in Cochise' expression. You compare our medicine man to your holy men? I do. Truth is, I figure the Creator probably listens to prayers in Apache just as well as he listens to them in English. Maybe better, considering how long your people have been talking to him from this land. A murmur ran through the assembled warriors. Cochise stopped his circling and faced Ethan directly. You speak strange words for a white man. Maybe, but they're true words. Cochise was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We will hear the full story of what happened today. Nantan Lupan will tell it, and if we believe his words, you will be welcome in our camp. If not, he shrugged eloquently. What followed was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. The entire band gathered around a central fire as Nantan Lupan told the story of the day's events. But this wasn't just a simple recounting of facts. It was a formal ceremony, complete with ritual gestures and ceremonial language that transformed the tale into something approaching legend. The medicine man described how he had been gathering herbs for healing ceremonies when the 6 white men had surrounded him. He spoke of their greed, their threats, their willingness to torture an old man for information about gold. And then he told of how a lone rider had appeared like an answer to prayer, risking his own life to defend a stranger. As the story unfolded, Ethan began to understand that he wasn't just being evaluated as a potential threat. He was being considered for something much more significant. The warriors listened with the intensity of men hearing prophecy, and when Nantan Lupan finished speaking, the silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Cochise stood and addressed the gathering in Apache, his voice carrying the authority of unquestioned leadership. When he finished, a dozen warriors stepped forward, each one laying a weapon at Ethan's feet, rifles, knives, war clubs, even a magnificent bow decorated with eagle feathers. My warriors offer you their weapons, Cochise explained. It is a sign of trust, an acknowledgement that you have proven yourself worthy of respect. Do you understand the significance of this gesture? Ethan looked at the pile of weapons, feeling the weight of the moment. I think so, but I want to be sure I understand correctly. When a warrior offers his weapon to another man, he is saying that he trusts that man with his life and the lives of his family. It is not an honor we give lightly, especially to a white man. Cochise's voice carried a note of challenge. The question is, are you worthy of such trust? Ethan knew that his answer would determine not just his immediate fate, but possibly his entire future. He could accept the honor and all the responsibilities that came with it, or he could decline politely and hope to leave with his life. I don't know if I'm worthy, he said honestly, but I know I'll try to be. If your people are willing to trust me, then I'll do everything in my power to prove that trust wasn't misplaced. Cochise smiled for the first time since they had met. Spoken like a true warrior. Very well, Ethan McKrae. From this day forward, you are welcome among the Chiricahua Apache. You may come and go as you please, and any man who harms you will answer to me personally. But Nantan Lupan stepped forward, raising his hand for attention. There is more, he said solemnly. Much more. The spirits have been speaking to me throughout this day, and they have shown me visions of what is to come. Great troubles lie ahead for our people, soldiers, settlers, those who would drive us from our ancient homes. We will need friends among the white men, allies who can speak for us when our own voices are not heard. The medicine man reached into one of his pouches and withdrew a small object, a piece of turquoise carved into the shape of a wolf. This is a sacred token, blessed by my grandfather's grandfather and carried by medicine men for 7 generations. The spirits tell me it belongs to you now, Ethan McKrae. You are to be our voice among your people, our ambassador to the white world. Ethan stared at the carved turquoise, understanding that he was being offered something far beyond mere friendship. "I don't know anything about being an ambassador. You know about standing up for what is right," Nantan Lupan replied. "You know about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. That is all any ambassador truly needs to know." The ceremony that followed lasted until dawn. One by one, the warriors of the band came forward to formally acknowledge Ethan as a brother, each one reciting his lineage and war honors before clasping Ethan's hand. The women brought food and drink, treating him as they would any honored guest. The children, initially shy, gradually warmed to him and began asking questions about the outside world. But it was the final ceremony that would remain burned into Ethan's memory forever. As the first rays of sunlight painted the canyon walls gold and crimson, Cochise called for the ritual of Blood-Brotherhood to begin. "This is rarely done," the chief explained as the entire band gathered in a circle around the fire. "Blood-Brotherhood is a sacred bond, stronger than marriage, stronger than tribal loyalty. It makes you one of us in the eyes of the spirits, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." Ethan felt the gravity of the moment settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. "What does it mean exactly?" "It means that your enemies become our enemies, and our enemies become yours," Cochise said. "It means that you have a duty to defend our people, and we have a duty to defend you. It means that any child born to our tribe will call you uncle, and any child of yours will be welcomed as family." Nantan Lupan approached with a sacred knife, its blade gleaming in the firelight. "Are you prepared to make this commitment, Ethan McKrae? Once the ritual is complete, it cannot be undone. You will be Apache in spirit, even if your skin remains white." Ethan looked around the circle at the faces watching him, men, women, and children who had welcomed a stranger and offered him something beyond price. He thought of the 6 prospectors and the casual cruelty they had shown, then thought of Nantan Lupan's dignity in the face of that cruelty. He thought of the choice between easy profit and simple human decency, and knew which side he wanted to be on. "I'm ready," he said. The ritual itself was simple but profound. Cochise made a small cut on his palm, then did the same to Ethan's. They clasped hands, letting their blood mingle, while Nantan Lupan spoke words in ancient Apache that seemed to echo off the canyon walls with supernatural power. "By blood and by spirit, you are now our brother," Cochise said solemnly. "The Chiricahua Apache will remember this bond until the mountains crumble and the rivers run dry." But the medicine man wasn't finished. As the formal ceremony concluded, he raised his arms toward the lightning sky and called out in a voice that carried clearly through the canyon. Within minutes, riders began appearing at the canyon mouth, warriors from other bands, arriving as if they had been summoned by some invisible signal. "Word travels fast in these mountains," Nantan Lupan explained to Ethan's amazement. "The spirits have told all the Apache bands of what happened today. They come to see the white man who stood against 6 enemies to defend an old medicine man." Throughout the morning, warriors continued to arrive. Some came alone, others in small groups, until the hidden canyon held more Apache fighters than Ethan had ever imagined existed. By his rough count, there had to be nearly 300 men, representing every major band in the region. As the sun reached its zenith, the warriors formed an enormous circle around the central fire. Each band's chief stepped forward to speak, telling of their own encounters with white men, their own struggles against encroachment and persecution. The stories were heartbreaking. Tales of broken treaties, murdered families, children stolen and sent to distant schools to have their culture beaten out of them. But then Cochise rose to address the gathering, and the tone changed completely. He told the story of Ethan's intervention, of his willingness to risk his life for an Apache stranger, of his understanding that sacred men deserved protection regardless of their race. "This man has shown us that not all whites are our enemies," Cochise declared. "He has proven that courage and honor exist in men of all colors. For this reason, I propose that we extend to him the brotherhood that we have given to no other white man." What followed was a debate that lasted for hours, conducted entirely in Apache but accompanied by gestures and expressions that made the general content clear to Ethan. Some chiefs supported Cochise's proposal immediately, others needed convincing, and a few seemed openly hostile to the idea. But gradually, consensus began to emerge. One by one, the chiefs stepped forward to cast symbolic stones into a central pile. White stones for acceptance, black stones for rejection. When the voting was complete, the pile contained nearly 300 white stones and fewer than a dozen black ones. Nantan Lupan smiled broadly as he approached Ethan. "It is decided. You are now blood brother not just to the Chiricahua, but to all the Apache bands represented here. It is an honor that has never been given to a white man before." The celebration that followed was unlike anything Ethan could have imagined. Warriors who had been strangers an hour before clasped his hand and called him brother. Chiefs who led bands hundreds of miles away invited him to visit their camps. Young men asked him to teach them about white men's weapons and tactics, while elders shared stories and wisdom that had been passed down for generations. But it was an encounter with a grizzled war chief named Mangus Coloradus that drove home the true significance of what had happened. The old warrior, whose name meant red sleeves and whose reputation for ferocity was legendary, approached Ethan as the sun began to set. "I have fought white men for 30 years, Mangus said in careful English. "I have killed many, and many of my people have died. When I heard that Cochise proposed to make a white man our brother, I rode here to argue against it." Ethan waited, sensing that more was coming. "But I have watched you today. I have seen how you listen when our people speak, how you show respect for our customs, even when you do not understand them. I have seen that you do not look at us as curiosities or animals, but as men." The old chief extended his hand. "You have my support, brother, and my protection, should you ever need it." As the gathering began to disperse, with warriors heading back to their distant camps, Cochise approached Ethan with a serious expression. "You understand what you have committed yourself to?" Ethan nodded. "I think so. I'm expected to speak for your people when they need a voice among the whites, to use whatever influence I have to help protect them from injustice." "More than that," Cochise said, "you are expected to live in a way that honors the trust we have placed in you, to prove that the bond between Apache and white man can be more than mutual destruction." Over the following months, Ethan discovered just how serious the Apache took their newly forged alliance. He found himself serving as a mediator between the tribes and territorial authorities, using his position as a white man to gain audiences that would have been impossible for Apache representatives. When a mining company tried to force the Mescalero band off their traditional hunting grounds, Ethan rode to Santa Fe to present their case to the territorial governor. When army patrols began harassing peaceful Apache families, he met with military commanders to explain the difference between hostile raiders and innocent civilians. It wasn't easy work. Many whites viewed him as a traitor, an Indian lover who had gone native. He was threatened, attacked, and ostracized by his own people, but he also began to see results. Treaties were honored instead of broken. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation instead of violence. Lives were saved on both sides. The turning point came during what history would later call the Bascom Affair. A young army lieutenant, convinced that Cochise had kidnapped a white child, lured the chief to a meeting under a flag of truce, then tried to arrest him. Cochise escaped, but several of his relatives were taken hostage. Under normal circumstances, the incident would have sparked a war that could have lasted for years. Apache warriors were already gathering for a massive retaliatory strike against white settlements, but Ethan found himself in the unique position of being trusted by both sides. Working frantically to prevent bloodshed, he served as a go-between, carrying messages and proposals back and forth. He convinced the army that they had made a terrible mistake, and he persuaded the Apache chiefs that revenge would only bring more suffering to their people. The negotiations took 3 weeks, with tensions so high that violence seemed inevitable. But eventually, Ethan's patient diplomacy paid off. The hostages were released, the misunderstanding was explained, and both sides stepped back from the brink of war. "You have saved many lives today," Nantan Lupan told him when the crisis was over. "White lives and Apache lives alike. The spirits are pleased with the work you have done." But Ethan felt no satisfaction in the victory. "It's only temporary," he said. "There will be other misunderstandings, other young officers looking to make their reputations fighting Indians. I can't prevent all of them." "No," the medicine man agreed, "but you can show people that there is another way. You can prove that understanding is possible, that men of goodwill can find solutions to even the most difficult problems." And as the years passed, Ethan's reputation grew on both sides of the cultural divide. Apache mothers named their sons after him. White families welcomed him into their homes, knowing that his presence meant their communities were safe from Indian raids. Territorial officials sought his advice on native affairs, recognizing that his unique position gave him insights no one else possessed. But perhaps his greatest achievement was the school he established in a neutral valley between Apache lands and white settlements. Working with Nantan Lupan and several progressive white educators, he created a place where Apache and white children could learn together, sharing knowledge and building friendships that would last lifetimes. The school faced fierce opposition from extremists on both sides, whites who insisted that Indians couldn't be educated, and Apache traditionalists who feared their children would lose their cultural identity. But Ethan's influence, combined with the respect both communities had for Nantan Lupan, gradually overcame the resistance. Within 5 years, the school had produced a generation of young people who saw each other as individuals rather than enemies. Apache students learned English and arithmetic alongside white children who were studying native languages and traditional crafts. The playground where they played together became a symbol of what was possible when fear was replaced by understanding. When Ethan was 45, the territorial governor offered him the position of Commissioner of Indian Affairs, a role that would have given him enormous influence over the fate of all native peoples in the Southwest. It was the kind of appointment that could have made him wealthy and powerful, the culmination of everything he had worked toward. He turned it down. "Why?" the governor asked, genuinely puzzled. "You could accomplish so much more from an official position." Ethan smiled. "Because my strength comes from being trusted by both sides. The moment I accept a government position, I become part of the system that the Apache see as their enemy. I'd lose the very thing that makes me effective." Instead, he continued his work as an independent mediator, helping to negotiate treaties, resolve disputes, and build bridges between communities that had seemed destined for eternal conflict. He never married, dedicating his life entirely to the cause of peace, though he was beloved by Apache families throughout the territory who considered him an honorary uncle to their children. When Nantan Lupan finally passed away at the age of 91, Ethan was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. The ceremony drew Apache from hundreds of miles away, as well as white officials, traders, and settlers who had come to respect the old medicine man's wisdom and dignity. "He taught me that courage comes in many forms," Ethan said during the eulogy. "Sometimes it means standing up to 6 armed men in the desert. Sometimes it means sitting down with your enemies and finding common ground. But always it means doing what's right, even when it's difficult." Ethan lived to be 73, dying peacefully in his sleep in a cabin he had built near the school that had become his life's work. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, Apache and white, young and old, powerful and humble. They came not to mourn a politician or a celebrity, but to honor a man who had devoted his life to proving that understanding was possible between peoples who seemed to have nothing in common. The inscription on his grave marker, carved in both English and Apache, read simply, "Ethan McKrae, brother to all." But those who knew him best remembered him as the cowboy who had stood up for an old medicine man and, in doing so, had discovered that the greatest battles are won not with weapons, but with compassion. The alliance he had forged lasted long after his death. Apache bands that had once been bitter enemies of white settlers became their trading partners and allies. The school he founded grew into a college that attracted students from across the nation, and the principles he had fought for, that all people deserved respect regardless of their race, that differences could be resolved through dialogue rather than violence, became part of the foundation upon which the modern Southwest was built. In the end, Ethan McKrae had accomplished something that generals and politicians had declared impossible. He had turned enemies into friends, hatred into understanding, and conflict into cooperation. All because he had been willing to stand up for one old man who needed help, and because he had understood that doing the right thing was more important than doing the safe thing.